What the hell is going on out here? He demanded. Doctor, Rebecca said, this man insists that he needs to speak to you. I tried to tell him... Steve cut her off. Listen, Larry, we need to have a serious chat. I ain't leaving until you talk to me. Dr. Waite looked at the big man, obvious fear distorting his features, but he kept his voice calm. Fine, Steve, but it'll have to wait a couple of minutes. I'm in with a patient right now. Go and have a seat in the waiting room, and I'll see you after. And please, for the love of God, stop harassing my staff. This is really getting out of hand. Steve looked at him, anger supplanting his obvious drunkenness. 5 minutes, Larry. You got 5 minutes. Steve, I'm working here. I told you. I have to finish up. Now, I said we can sit down and talk. I don't think I'm being unreasonable here. Don't make me have to call security on you. Now go have a seat in the waiting room, and I'll see you as soon as I'm done. Steve stared down at the little man for a moment before nodding. He seemed to be satiated for the moment. But don't make me wait too long. I won't, Steve. Just go have a seat. Miraculously, Steve did just that. He simply nodded and strode back into the waiting room, seating himself across from the uncomfortable-looking old couple. Rebecca looked at Dr. Waite, a silent question stamped across her face. Waite simply shook his head. My girlfriend's ex-husband. Well, still husband, technically, but only on paper. They've been separated for 3 years. He looks dangerous, she whispered. It's okay, I can handle him. I'd rather just listen to what he has to say than call security and get him even more agitated. He pulls shit like this all the time. I keep hoping he gets himself locked up or something unrelated so I don't have to deal with it anymore. Hope she's worth it, Rebecca said with a short laugh. Me too, Waite said, disappearing back into the examination room. She could hear him making apologies to the man he had in there. She made her way back behind her desk and looked out at the big man sitting there in the waiting room, peacefully thumbing through an ancient National Geographic. He no longer looked so imposing. He just looked sad. She felt a pang of remorse for him. Steve sat staring down at a magazine, not really reading it. Not that he could with the words in constant motion. Something about chalk drawings on cave walls. It was crap. It beats those damned women's magazines, though. At least Nat Geo occasionally had the African women with their cans out. Steve sighed, folding the book over and throwing it back down on the long, squat table in front of him. Did they have a store that sold furniture designed specifically for doctors' offices? Where the hell else would you find a table that size? Steve Murray, the Scottish kid from New Jersey, captain of the high school wrestling team and voted class clown in the school yearbook. Not a kid anymore, he sighed. That inner voice inside telling him that this was a bad idea. That even in regards to his own emotional well-being, it was a novice move. He ignored it. It was distant and meek next to his hurt and anger and loneliness. It was a matter of pride, he told himself, and he couldn't let anything, even reason, get in the way of pride. If a man couldn't say he still had his pride, then he couldn't account for anything else. A good friend had told him that once. Steve didn't have friends anymore. He had bartenders and therapists. And what was the difference, really? They were both selling you something that felt good at the time, but wore off by morning. He sighed again, and got to his feet, wondering where the bathroom was in this place, when the girl behind the counter said, "All right, Steve, you can go through now. Straight back, past the water fountain." She flashed him a smile that said in no uncertain words, "You're a freak, mister." He felt like a freak. He ignored her. He ignored all of it. The old blue-haired couple staring at him with a mixture of fear and pity. The smug wallpaper with its vertical red and orange lines. The squat little table from Doctors' Waiting Rooms Are Us. Jesus, Steve, you're far gone. No wonder your life left you for this rich little fuck. He had to admit to himself that Sarah hadn't technically left him for anyone. In fact, if it were any man, it would have been the one before this guy. But having him around made it much more complicated. He could never expect to win Sarah back with this quack in the picture, with his big house, his personal yacht, his money. Steve felt small and sick when he walked down the hallway, the angles distorted like a hallway in a carnival funhouse. But it was too late now. He was determined to do this thing, as he had planned. He was already standing in front of the door. He was already knocking. He was already living in regret. "Have a seat, Steve," said Dr. Lawrence Waite, indicating the leather-backed chair positioned in front of his desk and glancing out the huge plate-glass window that dominated the back wall. Steve eyed it with a scowl. "I'll stand, thanks," he said defiantly. "Fine, then by all means, stand," Lawrence said, walking around his desk and taking his own seat, steepling his long fingered hands in front of him. He stared at Steve for a moment before finally asking, "What's your problem, Steve?" "What's my problem?" "You're my problem, man. Your money, and your luxury houses, and your big dick boats." He swayed, placing his big hand on the desk in front of him to steady himself. "You think you're such a big shot because you got some fancy PhD hanging on your wall and a little slut just out of high school answering your phone for you. Steve, you're drunk. Why don't you just go home and get some sleep?" "Fuck you, man! You don't get to tell me what you think I should do. You're fucking my goddamn wife." Waite exhaled. "She's not your wife anymore, Steve." "Yes, she is, Larry. She'll always be my wife." "Only on paper. The woman has hardly even spoken a word to you in the past 3 years, and that's usually to tell you to leave her alone. I know you're in pain, and God knows I don't want to make it any harder for you, but you really need to let this go. We've seen your car drive past the house, and we do have caller ID. We can tell when you call and hang up. You need to get on with your own life and leave Sarah alone. You can't scare someone into loving you." He looked at Steve with real remorse. There was nothing that could be done for the man until he made the decision to move on. "Let me call you a cab, Steve," Waite said, reaching for the phone on his desk. "You can go home and get some rest." Steve stepped toward him, grabbing his wrist. "I don't want your charity, or your goddamn pity. I want you out of her life. We're man and wife in God's eyes. We made vows that can never be broken." Dr. Waite let the phone drop to the receiver, gently prying his wrist from Steve's grasp, and rubbed it to return the circulation. He felt the situation was growing delicate, and he was unsure how to proceed. He looked into the big man's bloodshot eyes, feeling a mixture of remorse and fear. Fear that he would get physically hurt in this situation. Fear that he may never see the back of Stephen Murray as long as he had Sarah in his life. Steve supported himself on Waite's desk heavily before finally resigning to slump into the chair provided for him. Waite felt the knot forming in his chest loosen slightly. "Steve," he said, "I don't think I'm being unreasonable. I took the time to speak with you. I could just as easily have called security and been done with it. But I'm very busy, as you can see. Why don't we just talk about this another time, when you're sober and I'm not swamped with appointments? Please, let me call you a cab." He reached for the phone again. But this time Steve was faster. He lunged forward with a speed Waite could not have believed the man capable of, and snatched the phone away from him. He lifted it high and brought it down on the corner of the desk with a snap. The earpiece broke cleanly away from the phone, dangling loosely on a small bundle of black and yellow wires. Steve shook the ruined phone at him and bellowed, "I told you, I don't want your fucking charity." He dropped the phone and stepped forward to grab a hold of the arm of Waite's chair in a gesture that was obviously meant to be imposing, but stumbled and almost landed himself in the man's lap. It might have even been humorous in another time and place. Steve brought his face down inches from Waite's own face and snarled at him, eyes not quite focusing. Waite could smell the booze on him. He was really loaded. "Do you realize how easily I could simply pick you up and toss you through that window, you little prick? How easily I could just end your worthless life, you little wife-stealing fuck?" Waite kicked backward, toppling the chair, spilling himself to the floor and snaking away on his hands and knees, terrified that Steve would advance on him. Instead, Steve roared, his shoulders slumping in an angry posture reminiscent of a gorilla. He grabbed the first thing he saw on the desk, a coffee mug, and hurled it at the wall. It exploded in a firework of ceramic shards. "Steve!" Waite called from where he sat on the floor. "Calm the fuck down, man!" "Calm down? You're telling me to calm down?" Steve roared at him. "You have everything. fucking everything, and you have to take the one thing that I care about, the one thing that makes me happy,